There are moments that arrive without warning, and split a life cleanly into the part that came before and the part that comes after. Thomas Ashford did not know he was living one of those moments. He only knew that a small voice had spoken near his elbow, and that the words it carried were so quiet, and so strange, that he set down his fork to be sure he had heard them at all. "Excuse-me, mister. Can I take these 2 pieces of chicken home?" He turned. Standing beside his table was a little girl. She could not have been more than 8 years old. Her hair was in 2 neat braids that someone had clearly taken great care to plait that morning, though one of the ribbons had come loose. She wore a school uniform a size too big, the sleeves rolled twice at the wrists, and a pair of sneakers that had been white once and were now the gray of much washing. She was looking at his plate. Not at him. At the plate. At the 2 pieces of fried chicken he had pushed to the side, already full, already finished, already thinking about the car waiting outside. The restaurant was called the Magnolia Room, and it was not the kind of place where one expected to find a child standing alone. The tablecloths were white linen. The lighting was low and gold. A man in the corner played something soft on a grand piano, and the people who came here came to feel, for an hour or 2, like the world belonged to them. A child in a too big uniform did not belong to that picture. And yet there she stood, with her hands folded in front of her, waiting. Before Thomas could find an answer, a shape came fast across the dining room. "There you are." "I am so sorry, sir." The man wore the dark suit of management and the tight, professional smile of someone whose evening had just gone wrong. His name tag read Vincent Marsh. He took the little girl gently but firmly by the shoulder, the way you steer something you want gone. "I do apologize, Mr. Ashford. She is not supposed to be out here. She knows that." He looked down at the child. "Maya. What did I tell you? You stay in the back. You do not bother the guests." The girl's eyes dropped to the carpet. "I wasn't bothering him," she said, so softly it was almost nothing. "I just asked a question." "Wait." Thomas raised one hand. The single word stopped the manager mid-turn. "She asked me a question. I would like to answer it." "Why are you answering it for me?" Vincent's smile strained at the corners. "Sir, she is the daughter of one of our staff. She has no business approaching customers. It will not happen again." "It is happening now," Thomas said. "And you are the one making it a scene." Let go of her shoulder. The hand lifted. The girl stayed where she was, very still, the way children learn to be still when adults are deciding things above their heads. Across the table, Thomas's oldest friend, a retired judge named Walter Brennan, slowly lowered his wine glass and watched. He had known Thomas for 40 years. He had rarely seen that particular cold in his eyes. "Now," Thomas said, turning to the girl. "Your name is Maya." She nodded. "And you asked if you could take these 2 pieces of chicken home." She nodded again. "They are yours," he said. "But I am curious. Tell me something first. A girl your age, in a place like this, late at night. Why do you want cold chicken to take home, when there is so much food here you could eat right now?" And then Maya said the thing that would not leave him. The thing that would follow him out of that restaurant, and into his car, and up the stairs of his great empty house, and into the gray hours before dawn when a man finally cannot lie to himself anymore. "It's not for me," she said. "It's for my mama." The dining room did not stop, exactly. But the air around the table changed. "Your mama," Thomas repeated. "She works here," Maya said. "In the kitchen. She washes the dishes and she carries the heavy things." She looked at the plate again, and there was a carefulness in the look, a kind of grown-up worry that no 8-year-old should have learned. "She gives me her dinner. Every night. She says she ate already, but she didn't. I see her plate. It's empty before there's anything on it. She hasn't had real food in a long time, mister, and this is real food, and it's just sitting here, and I thought if nobody wanted it." She did not finish. She did not need to. Thomas Ashford had built an empire out of seeing what other people missed. He had made his first fortune in shipping and his second in real estate, and somewhere in the building of it he had stopped being able to be surprised. Boards did not surprise him. Markets did not surprise him. Los did not surprise him. He sat now across from an 8-year-old girl who had just surprised him more completely than anyone had in 30 years, and he found that his throat had gone tight, and he did not entirely know why. He did know, of course. He simply did not want to. The girl had said it's for my mama with no performance in it, no awareness that she was saying anything remarkable, and that was the part that landed. She thought this was normal. She thought everyone's mother quietly went without so the children could eat. She had no idea that, 2 tables over, a man had ordered more food than he could finish and was going to leave a quarter of it to be thrown into the cold. To her, hunger was simply the weather of her life, and she had learned to dress for it. Thomas had spent decades insulating himself from exactly this, from the small unbearable fact that for a great many people, going without was not a crisis but a routine. "What is your mother's name?" he said. "Yvonne," said Maya. "Yvonne Carter." "And how long has she worked here?" "A long time. Since before my little brother." The girl thought about it. "Maybe 2 years." Walter set his glass down. "Thomas," he said quietly. "Maya." Thomas gave a small nod. Walter leaned toward the girl, and his voice was the gentle voice of a man who had spent a career drawing the truth out of frightened people without frightening them more. "Maya. Does your mother know you came out here to ask the man for his chicken?" The girl's eyes went wide. "No, sir. Please don't tell her." For the first time, her composure cracked, and she looked exactly as young as she was. She'd be so embarrassed. "She told me to never, ever ask anybody for anything. She says we don't beg. She says we work." I breath. "But she's so tired. And she's so thin now. And I'm not begging, I'm just taking what was going to get thrown away." Thomas turned to Vincent Marsh, and his voice dropped to something flat and quiet and very cold. "Bring the girl's mother out here. Now." The manager's smile finally died. "Sir, the kitchen is in the middle of service. I did not ask about your service. He asked you to bring me Yvonne Carter." Vincent hesitated 1 second too long, and in that second Thomas understood that something was wrong here, something beyond a hungry child and an embarrassed manager. "A man does not stall like that over nothing." "Go," Thomas said. Yvonne Carter came out of the kitchen a few minutes later, drying her hands on a towel that she had clearly been told to remove and had forgotten in her panic. She was younger than Thomas expected, and thinner than a working woman ought to be, with the hollow look of someone running on too little for too long. When she saw her daughter standing at the rich man's table, the color left her face entirely. "Maya." Her voice shook. "Baby, what did you do?" "I am so sorry, sir, she knows better." She reached for the girl. "I'll take her home right now. I'm so sorry to, Mrs. Carter," Thomas said. "Stop. Please. Your daughter did nothing wrong." The woman froze, half bent toward her child, afraid to believe it. "She asked me for the food on my plate," Thomas said. "Food I was going to leave behind. She asked because she wanted to bring it home to you. Because she has noticed, the way children notice, that you have not been eating." Let that sit a moment. "Is that true?" Yvonne Carter's mouth opened, and closed. She looked at her daughter. She looked at the rich man. And the lie she had been telling for weeks, the lie that she had eaten, the lie that everything was fine, the lie that mothers tell so their children can sleep, simply ran out of road. "I ate," she said. "I'm fine. Mama." Maya's voice was very small. "Your plate is always empty." The woman closed her eyes. Thomas felt the cold in him shift into something harder and more useful. He had been angry many times in his life. This was different. This was the specific anger of a man discovering that something monstrous had been happening in a building he had walked through without looking. Mrs. Carter, he said. How long since you have had a proper meal? She did not answer. She stared at the floor, the way her daughter had stared at it, and Thomas understood that the silence ran in the family, that they had both been taught to swallow things so that the people around them would not have to taste them. It was Walter who asked the question that broke it open. Yvonne, he said gently. When were you last paid? Her head came up. And for the first time, behind the shame, there was something else. There was fear. 3 weeks, she said. We were told there was a problem with the payroll. We were told to be patient. Thomas turned to Vincent Marsh so slowly that the manager actually stepped back. 3 weeks, Thomas said. This woman has not been paid in 3 weeks. Is she the only one? Vincent's hands had begun to sweat. Sir, there is a temporary cash flow matter affecting, is she the only one? From across the room, a busboy who had stopped pretending to clear a table answered before the manager could. No, sir, the young man said. It's most of us. The dam broke then, the way these things break, all at once after holding too long. A waitress near the bar set down her tray. I haven't been paid since last month, she said. I've been putting gas in my car $5 at a time. A cook leaned out from the kitchen door, still in his apron. 3 of us in the back are behind. eBay got a baby coming in February. An older woman who had been folding napkins by the host stand spoke without looking up. I borrowed against my sister's credit card to keep my lights on. He was too ashamed to tell anyone. A dishwasher younger than Yvonne, barely out of his teens, stepped half out of the kitchen with his hands still red from the sink. I sleep in my car some nights, he said, very quietly, as though confessing a crime rather than naming one done to him. It's cheaper than the bus across the city. He didn't say anything because Mrs. Marsh said. Anybody who made noise about the pay would be the first one cut when the schedule got tight. A looked at the floor. I have a daughter too. Sis with her grandmother. He haven't sent money in a month. A server in her 50s, who had the bearing of someone who had worked rooms like this her whole life and learned never to let it show on her face, finally let it show. I've been here 11 years, she said. 11 years. I have never once been late on a single thing I owed. Last week I was late on all of it. And I sat in my kitchen and I cried, and I thought it was my fault. I thought I'd done something wrong. Her voice did not rise. That was what made it land. I didn't do anything wrong. He just got quiet, because quiet is what they wanted. One after another, the staff of the Magnolia Room stepped forward, and what had looked from the dining room like a smooth and golden evening revealed itself for what it was. A house running on the unpaid labor of people who had been told to be patient, and to be grateful, and to be quiet. Thomas Ashford listened to all of it, and the longer he listened, the colder and steadier he became. Because the Magnolia Room was his. Not his wife's. Not a friend's. His. It was one small piece of a hospitality group his company had acquired 2 years earlier, a footnote in a portfolio of dozens of restaurants, a line item he had never personally examined because the numbers came in clean and the managers reported up through 3 layers of people who reported up through 2 more layers of people, until by the time anything reached Thomas Ashford it had been sanded down into a single green figure on a quarterly slide. A had not known the name of this restaurant before tonight. A had certainly not known the name Yvonne Carter. A had dined here because his assistant had made the reservation, and he had complimented the chicken, and he had been about to leave 2 pieces of it on a plate to be scraped into the trash while the woman who carried his dishes went home hungry. Mrs. Marsh, Thomas said. Do you know who I am? The manager's face had gone the color of paper. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Jure, I own this restaurant. I own the company that owns this restaurant. Which means the decision to withhold these people's wages was made somewhere beneath me, by someone who answers to me, and reported to me as a temporary cash flow matter on a page I apparently did not read carefully enough. A set both hands flat on the table. So I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer it. Where did the payroll money go? Vincent Marsh's mouth worked. Sir, I only follow the directives I'm given, that is not an answer. There were renovations. Upstairs. A private dining room. The regional director said the money would come back once, renovations. Thomas' voice did not rise. It dropped. That was somehow worse. You took the wages of the people who washed the dishes and you spent it on a nicer room for people who could afford to pay for one. And when they asked where their money was, you told them to be patient. And when a child got hungry enough to ask a stranger for the food off his plate, your first instinct was not shame. It was to drag her away so I would not notice. The manager said nothing. There was nothing to say. Walter rose from his chair, slow and deliberate, the way he used to rise to deliver a sentence from the bench. Thomas, he said. I think you have your answer. The question now is what you intend to do with it. Thomas looked at the room. At the staff standing along the walls, watching him, hoping, not daring to hope. At Yvonne Carter, who had her arm around her daughter now, pulling the girl against her side. At Maya, who was still, after everything, glancing at the 2 pieces of chicken on the plate, as if afraid that in all this commotion the actual reason she had come might be forgotten. He picked up the plate, and he handed it to the girl himself. This is yours, he said. Take it home. But you will not be taking it home cold, and you will not be taking only this. He turned to the cook in the doorway. I want a full hot meal prepared for Mrs. Carter and her children. Now. And when? For everyone working in this building tonight. Nobody on this staff goes home hungry. That is the last unpaid thing that happens in this restaurant. The cook hesitated, looked at the manager, then looked at Thomas, and made the right choice. He went back into the kitchen. Then Thomas turned to Vincent Marsh, and the warmth that he had shown the child vanished completely. You are relieved of your duties, effective this moment. You will not touch a single record before you go. My people will be here within the hour, and every document connected to payroll, scheduling, and these so-called renovations will be preserved exactly as it is. If one file is altered, if one employee is contacted and told to keep quiet, Judge Brennan and I will know, and you will not enjoy what follows. Do you understand me? The manager understood. He left without his coat. For a moment the dining room was very quiet. The guests at the other tables had long since stopped pretending not to watch, and a few of them, to their credit, had the grace to look ashamed of the meals cooling in front of them. The pianist had stopped playing somewhere in the middle of it all, and no one had told him to start again. Then the kitchen door swung open, and the cook came out carrying a tray, and on the tray were plates of hot food, and he set the first one down not in front of a guest but in front of Yvonne Carter. She stared at it as though she had forgotten what it was for. Eat, the cook said. Marsh isn't here to tell you that you can't. She sat down slowly at an empty table, the white linen one, the kind she had spent 2 years clearing and never once sat at, and she pulled her daughter onto her lap, and the little boy was brought a high chair from somewhere, and for the first time in 3 weeks Yvonne Carter ate a full meal that she did not have to lie about. Maya watched her mother eat with an attention that broke something open in Thomas's chest, the relief of a child who had been carrying a worry far too heavy for her, finally allowed to set it down. Walter came to stand beside Thomas at the edge of the room. You did the right thing, the old judge said. But you should know it isn't going to feel clean. Doing the right thing late never does. There's a part of you that's going to keep asking how long this was happening while you ate the chicken and complimented the chef. I know, Thomas said. Good, said Walter. Hold on to that. It's the only thing that keeps a man from going blind again. That night, Thomas Ashford did not go home. He sat in the small back office of a restaurant he had owned for 2 years and never once visited, and he read the payroll records by the light of a single lamp, and what he found there was not a story about one greedy manager. It was a story about a machine. A machine built to deliver clean numbers upward and push hardship downward, where it would land on the people least able to refuse it. Yvonne Carter was not an exception. She was the design. He found the renovation invoices in a folder marked, with no apparent sense of irony, guest experience. A private dining room on the second floor, redone in marble and brass for the kind of customer who books out a room to impress other people. The cost of it, almost to the dollar, matched the wages that had gone unpaid. Someone above the manager had made a choice, coldly and on paper, that a better room for the rich was worth more than on pay for the poor, and had been confident no one would ever connect the two figures, because the two figures lived on different pages, in different reports, read by different people who never spoke to each other. That was the genius of it. The cruelty had been broken into pieces small enough that no single person had to feel like they had done it. Walter stayed with him through most of it, saying little, reading over his shoulder, occasionally tapping a line with one finger and letting the silence do the rest. Near midnight the old judge said, "You know what I never understood, in 40 years on the bench? It was never the monsters that frightened me. Monsters are rare. It was the paperwork. The ordinary people, signing ordinary forms, each one doing a small reasonable thing, until at the end of it a woman is giving her dinner to her child. No villain anywhere you can point to. Used 100 clean signatures. I signed some of them," Thomas said. "I know," said Walter. "That's why you're still sitting here at midnight instead of home asleep. Don't lose that either. I paid them all that week. Not as a gesture. As a debt." He advanced the back wages from his own accounts within 48 hours, with interest, and he wrote a letter to every employee that did not contain the word sorry as decoration but as a fact he intended to earn. He installed an outside payroll service that reported to no one inside the building. He created a hardship fund that any worker could draw on without explaining themselves to a manager, because he had learned that the requirement to explain your hunger to the person withholding your wages is its own kind of cruelty. The regional director was dismissed. So were two executives above the regional director, men who had seen the same reports Thomas had seen and had understood them better, and had said nothing, because the numbers were good and good numbers are a comfortable place to stop asking questions. Thomas had been one of those men. He did not pretend otherwise. He simply decided, at 63 years old, to stop. It would be easy to say that he did all of this out of pure goodness, and it would not be true. He did it because an 8-year-old girl had looked at his plate and not at him, and had told him that the food was for her mother, and in that single sentence had shown him a thing about himself he could no longer unsee. He had spent his whole life believing that he was generous. He gave to charities. He funded a wing of a hospital that bore his name. And all the while, 3 floors below his attention, a woman was giving her dinner to her daughter and telling her child she had already eaten. Generosity, he understood now, had been the thing he did so that he would never have to look at the thing he was doing. He had been giving away the surplus of a system that produced people like Yvonne Carter on purpose. He went to see them, a week later, on a cold evening with snow coming down outside. The Carters lived on the 4th floor of a building whose heat worked when it felt like it. Thomas climbed the stairs himself, because there was no elevator, and he thought, climbing them, about how many such stairs the people who served him climbed every night, and how rarely he had wondered about it. Maya answered the door, and her whole face changed when she saw him, lighting up with the uncomplicated joy of a child who has not yet learned to be careful with her happiness. "Mr. Ashford." Then she remembered her manners, and put her hands behind her back, and said, with great seriousness, "Would you like to come in? We have chairs." He came in. The apartment was small and very clean, the cleanliness of people who cannot control much but can control this. A little boy, maybe 3 years old, watched him from a blanket on the floor. Yvonne stood by the stove, and there was color in her face now, a little weight back in it, and on the counter behind her Thomas could see groceries. Real groceries. Eggs and bread and milk and fruit. Mary Ashford. She did not know what to do with her hands. "I didn't expect, please," said Maya, "get the man a glass of water." He sat. The girl brought him water in a cup with a faded cartoon on it, holding it with both hands so as not to spill, and he thanked her as though she had handed him something precious, because she had. "How are you eating?" he asked Yvonne. It was a blunt question, and he meant it bluntly. 3 meals a day, she said, and her voice caught on the simple impossibility of it. "All 3 of us. You keep checking the refrigerator. I don't quite believe it's real yet." It's real, he said. And it is not charity. Eat this what you were owed. You earned every dollar of it carrying my dishes and washing my plates, and you should never have had to skip a single meal to feed your daughter while a company I own spent your wages on a fancier room. A looked at the little boy on the floor. What is his name? Daniel, she said. And he eats now too. He eats now too. Thomas nodded, and looked down at the cartoon cup in his hands, and for a moment the great cold control that had carried him through 40 years of boardrooms left him entirely, and he was simply a man who had almost let a family go hungry without ever knowing their names. Maya climbed onto the chair beside him. Did you eat your chicken that night? She asked. After you gave us ours. No, he admitted. I didn't. He wasn't hungry anymore. The girl considered this with the gravity of a judge. You should eat your food, she said. It's bad to waste it. Mama says when you waste food, somewhere a person who needed it goes without. Thomas Ashford, who had built 2 fortunes and could have bought the entire block they sat on without noticing the expense, was quietly and completely undone by an 8-year-old's table manners. Your mama, he said, is a wise woman. And so are you. He won't forget it. Before he left, Maya wanted to show him something. She led him by the hand to a corner of the room where a shoebox sat on a low shelf, and she lifted the lid with great ceremony. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, careful crayon pictures of food. A plate piled high with chicken. A table covered in dishes. A refrigerator with the door open, every shelf full. Thomas looked at them for a long time, and he did not trust himself to speak. I threw what we'd eat, Maya explained, when we had enough. So I wouldn't forget what it looked like. She said it the way a child says a thing she does not yet understand is heartbreaking. Mama keeps them. She says they're like a wish. Thomas Ashford had been given gifts his whole life. Watches and paintings and the keys to buildings. He had never been handed anything that hollowed him out the way that shoebox did. A little girl had been so hungry, for so long, that she had drawn pictures of meals to hold on to the memory of them. And she had kept the pictures in a box, like treasure, because to her they were. He did not reach for his wallet. He had learned that lesson at this family's table, from a 15-year-old's worth of wisdom packed into an 8-year-old. Money was not the thing to give here. Money was the thing he owed, and had already paid, and would keep paying as a matter of obligation and not generosity. What they gave instead was a promise, and he made it looking the child in the eye, the way you make promises you intend to keep. You won't need the drawings anymore, he said. But keep them. Keep them so that when you're grown, and you have more than enough, you remember exactly what it cost to get there. And you remember the people still drawing pictures of food in boxes, all over this city, waiting for someone to finally look. Will you do that for me, Maya? The girl nodded, very solemn. I'll remember, she said. And he believed her. In the months that followed, things changed, and they changed in the way real change happens, which is slowly, and unevenly, and without applause. Thomas put the entire restaurant group through an audit, and where he found wages withheld, he restored them. He created a rule across every property he owned that no staff meal could ever be treated as a privilege to be revoked. If you worked the shift, you ate. He had learned what it meant for a child to feel like a thief for wanting food that was going to be thrown away, and he made certain no one in any of his buildings would feel that again. He gathered the staff of the Magnolia Room one morning before opening, and he did something the people who worked for him had never seen a man at his level do. He sat down among them, in an ordinary chair, and he told them the truth without softening it. He told them what had been done, and who had done it, and that he had been one of the people comfortable enough to never ask. He did not ask them to forgive him. He told them what would change, and then, over the following year, he did the far more difficult thing, which was to keep his word when no one was watching anymore. The cook with the apron asked him, blandly, whether this was real or whether it would fade once the embarrassment did. Thomas said, ask me again in a year. The cook did. And by then the answer was already obvious in the full refrigerators and the on-time checks and the long staff table in the back. It promoted from within. The 11-year server who had cried in her kitchen became a shift lead. The young dishwasher who had been sleeping in his car was given an advance against his restored wages and helped into an apartment, and within months he had his daughter back under his own roof on weekends. None of it was charity. Thomas was meticulous about that distinction now, almost severe about it. These were people who had earned their wages and been robbed of them, and what he was doing was not kindness. It was correction. He had come to believe that the word kindness, applied to the simple act of paying people what they were owed, was itself a kind of insult. He set up an education fund, though, not only for his employees but for their children. He did not single Maya out. He did not need to. Yvonne enrolled her in a program for the fund herself, filled out every line of the application, because Thomas had learned that the dignity of a thing is in the earning of it, and he was not going to take that from her by handing it over as a favor. But he kept track, quietly. He always would. A year after the night Maya asked him for 2 pieces of chicken, Thomas Ashford returned to the Magnolia room. It looked different now, though a stranger might not have been able to say why. The linen was still white. The piano still played. But the people who worked there moved differently. They did not flinch when a manager passed. They did not lower their voices. There was a new manager, an older woman who had come up from the kitchen and knew the name of every person under her, and the first thing she had done in the job was put a long staff table in the back where the workers ate together before service, hot food, every night, no exceptions. The marble dining room upstairs, the one the wages had been stolen to build, had been quietly repurposed. Thomas had not torn it out, because tearing it out would have been a gesture, and he had grown suspicious of gestures. Instead he had opened it, one night a week, as a free dinner for anyone in the neighborhood who needed one. The same marble. The same brass. But now the people eating beneath the imported chandeliers were the people who had always been kept out of rooms like that, and the staff who served them were paid for every minute, and ate the same food at the same long table when the doors closed. It was the only thing the renovation had ever produced that Thomas could look at without flinching. Yvonne Carter no longer washed dishes there. She managed the front of the house now, and she did it well, and she earned enough that her refrigerator stayed full without a single anxious thought. Maya was 9, and taller, and her braids were as neat as ever. She came in after school sometimes, and did her homework at the staff table, and the cook slipped her fruit and quizzed her on her spelling. She found Thomas at his table by the window, and she walked up to him with the confidence of a child who has learned she is welcome in a place. She was carrying a small paper bag. "I made you something," she said. "Well, Mama helped. But I packed it." He opened the bag. Inside were 2 pieces of fried chicken, wrapped carefully in foil. He looked up at her. Ayer had turned a full circle and arrived back at the same 2 pieces of chicken where it had begun, except that everything beneath them had been remade. A year ago a frightened child had asked a stranger for the food he was about to throw away, because her mother was starving in his kitchen and he did not know her name. Now a confident girl was handing him a meal she had packed with her own hands, in a restaurant where her mother managed the floor and ate her fill, and the rich man was the one being looked after. The chicken was the same. The world around it was not. That, Thomas thought, was the whole story in a single foil package. Nothing dramatic. Used 2 pieces of chicken, passed in the other direction at last. "It's for you to take home," Maya said. "So you have real food when you get there. Mama says you live in a big house all by yourself, and that's even sadder than being hungry." She paused, and then, with the devastating directness that only children possess, she added, "Are you lonely, Mr. Ashford?" Walter, sitting across the table, made a small sound into his wine. Thomas looked at the chicken, and then at the girl, and he found that he could not quite speak for a moment. "Sometimes," he said at last. "Yes." Maya nodded, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. "Then you should come eat at the staff table with us. Mama always cooks too much." "Ekame." "Not that night, but soon, and then often." A billionaire eating fried chicken at a folding table in the back of a restaurant with the people who cleaned it, listening to a 9-year-old explain the rules of a card game he kept losing on purpose. It was not the laugh anyone would have predicted for him. It was, he came to think, the first true thing he had done in years. One evening near the end of that year, Maya asked him a question, the way she did, with no warning and no mercy. They were at the staff table, and the dinner rush was over, and she was beating him soundly at cards. "Mr. Ashford," she said. "Why didn't you ever look before? You owned the whole place. You walked past my mama 100 times. How come you didn't see her until I asked you for the chicken?" The table went quiet. Even Walter, who had an answer for most things, said nothing. They were all, Thomas realized, waiting to hear what he would say, because it was the question underneath everything, and a child had simply walked up and said it out loud. "Because I had built a life," Thomas said slowly, "where I never had to." That's the honest answer, Maya. Money buys a man a lot of things. The most dangerous thing it buys him is permission to stop looking. He had so much that I never had to notice what anything cost, or who paid for it. And the longer that goes on, the easier it gets, until one day you can walk past a hungry woman every night for 2 years and call yourself a good man because you gave to charity. He set down his cards. "You did something no one else had done in a very long time. You made me look. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay that. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying." Maya considered this with the seriousness she gave everything. Then she nodded, and laid down her cards, and said, "You still owe me a quarter." You lost again. He laughed, and it was a real laugh, the kind he had nearly forgotten how to make. And he paid her the quarter, because a debt is a debt, and he had learned, finally, to pay what he owed. Here is the part worth carrying out of the room with you. A child asked a rich man for 2 pieces of chicken, and she did not ask for herself. She asked for her mother, who was going hungry so that her daughter would not. That was the thing that shocked him. Not the request. The love behind it. A love so ordinary, and so total, that an 8-year-old had organized her whole small life around hiding her hunger so her mother would not worry, while her mother hid her own so the child would not. And the lesson did not belong to the child. It belonged to the man. Thomas Ashford learned that you can be generous and blind at the same time. That you can give away millions and still let a family starve 3 floors beneath your attention, simply because the numbers came in clean and you never asked what they were made of. He learned that charity given from above is not the same as justice rendered across. That what Yvonne Carter needed was never his pity, but his payroll. That dignity is not a gift the powerful bestow. It is a debt they owe, and too often refuse to look at. Real compassion is the harder thing. It is reading the page you would rather skim. It is asking where the clean number came from, and who paid for it, and whether they could afford to. It is making certain that no mother has to give her dinner to her child in secret, and no child has to beg a stranger to feed the person she loves most in the world. There is a quiet question the story leaves in the room, and it is not a question about Thomas Ashford. It is a question about the rest of us. How many Yvonne Carters have carried our plates, and refilled our glasses, and gone home to empty refrigerators while we complimented the chicken? How many Mayas have drawn pictures of food in shoeboxes in apartments 3 floors below our attention? The comfortable answer is that we did not know. But not knowing, the story insists, is rarely an accident. It is usually a thing we arrange. We build lives, and systems, and clean quarterly reports, precisely so that we will never have to look directly at what our comfort costs other people. The child did not give the rich man money. She gave him something far more expensive. She took away his permission not to see. Sometimes justice does not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives in the voice of a little girl in a too big uniform, looking at a plate instead of a man, asking for the smallest thing in the world. And sometimes all it takes is one person, finally, willing to set down his fork, and listen, and see. This story is a work of fiction. All characters and events are imagined, and any resemblance to real people or actual events is entirely coincidental. It is offered only as a story, and as a quiet reminder that the way we treat the people who serve us, and the children who love them, may be the truest measure of who we really are.